Most people thought the dog was losing its mind, until they zoomed in on the picture. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Rain slammed against the windows of Daniel Brooks' small house outside Blackwater Lake as the late-night news played quietly in the background. The storm had already knocked out power across half the county, and the wind outside sounded like something alive moving through the trees. Daniel sat on the couch with a blanket over his lap, barely paying attention to the TV while scrolling through his phone. Beside him, Rocky, his 7-year-old German Shepherd, rested peacefully on the floor. At least he had been peaceful a few seconds earlier. Suddenly, the dog's ears shot straight up. Rocky lifted his head slowly and stared at the television. His body became stiff. Daniel frowned. "What's wrong, boy?" On the screen appeared a breaking news update about a missing 8-year-old girl named Emily Carter, who had vanished nearly 48 hours earlier during a family camping trip near Blackwater Forest. The station displayed a smiling school photo of the little girl, while reporters explained that search teams were still combing the woods despite worsening weather conditions. Rocky stood up immediately. Low growls rumbled deep in his chest. Daniel looked over in confusion because Rocky almost never growled at anything. Not thunder, not strangers, not even fireworks on the 4th of July. But now the dog stared at the screen like he had seen a ghost. Then came the photo. The reporter switched to an image taken by a volunteer search team earlier that afternoon near the edge of the forest. At first glance, it looked completely normal. Wet trees, muddy trails, flashlights in the distance. But the moment the picture appeared, Rocky exploded into panic. The German Shepherd barked so violently that Daniel nearly dropped his phone. Rocky lunged toward the television, claws scraping across the hardwood floor. His barking echoed through the house as he jumped against the TV stand, eyes locked on the corner of the image. "Rocky! Hey, calm down." Daniel grabbed the dog's collar, but Rocky kept whining and barking, almost desperately. The dog pressed his nose against the screen and scratched furiously at the lower right corner of the picture. Daniel had never seen him behave like this before. His heart began pounding. "What are you seeing?" he whispered. Rocky suddenly let out a long, painful howl that sent chills down Daniel's spine. The room felt colder. Outside, lightning flashed through the windows. Daniel grabbed the remote and paused the broadcast. Slowly, he stepped closer to the television. Rocky continued trembling beside him, staring at the exact same spot in the image. Daniel leaned in and squinted. At first, he saw nothing except rain-soaked trees and darkness. But then his stomach dropped. Deep in the background, partially hidden behind a fallen log nearly 30 yards away from the search crew, something small appeared between the trees. It looked almost invisible at first. Pale shape, tiny, human. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It looked like a little hand. Daniel stared at the frozen image while rain hammered the roof above him. His pulse thudded painfully in his ears. The blurry shape hidden between the trees looked so small that most people would never notice it, especially during a live television broadcast. But now that Rocky had drawn attention to it, Daniel could not unsee it. The pale shape looked exactly like tiny fingers wrapped around the side of a fallen log. "No way," he whispered under his breath. Rocky let out another sharp bark and scratched at the television again. Harder this time. The dog's breathing had become fast and uneven. Daniel grabbed the remote and rewound the broadcast several seconds before pausing once more on the image. He stepped closer until he was only inches from the screen. The search team members in the picture stood near the muddy trail with flashlights pointed toward the ground, completely unaware of what might have been hidden behind them. Daniel narrowed his eyes. The shape moved slightly as the video replayed for a split second before freezing again. His stomach twisted. "Rocky, are you trying to tell me she is there?" The German Shepherd whined softly and pressed his nose against the lower corner of the screen. Daniel had adopted Rocky 3 years earlier after the dog retired from a regional K-9 training program. The shelter told him Rocky had once been trained for search and rescue work, but the dog had struggled after losing his previous handler. Since then, Rocky had become quiet, calm, and deeply attached to Daniel. But tonight something inside the dog had awakened again. Daniel reached for his phone and snapped a picture of the television screen. He zoomed in carefully. The image became grainy, but the shape remained there. Tiny fingers, pale skin, hidden behind the log. A cold chill crawled through his body. Outside, thunder shook the windows. Daniel immediately searched online for the original news photo. Within minutes he found the image posted on the local station's social media page. Thousands of comments flooded beneath it. People were discussing the storm, the missing child, and the dangerous forest conditions, but nobody mentioned the shape in the background. Not one person seemed to notice it. Rocky suddenly began pacing in circles across the living room, whining louder with every second. Then he stopped near the front door and stared directly at Daniel. "You want me to show them, do you not?" Daniel muttered nervously. He hesitated. What if he was wrong? What if the internet mocked him for seeing things that were not there? But Rocky's reaction was impossible to ignore. Daniel took another screenshot and circled the hidden shape before uploading it online with a simple caption. "My dog would not stop reacting to this photo from the Emily Carter search. Am I crazy? Or does this look like someone hiding behind the log?" Within minutes, the comments exploded. Some users agreed immediately. Others accused Daniel of trying to gain attention from a tragedy. One person wrote that the shape was probably just wet tree bark. Another insisted it was clearly a child's hand. The argument spread faster every minute. Notifications flooded Daniel's phone non-stop. Rocky remained near the television, staring at the image with intense focus. Then suddenly the dog growled again. Not at the screen this time, at the window facing the dark forest beyond the backyard. Daniel slowly turned his head toward the glass. Lightning flashed across the trees outside for only a second, but in that brief burst of white light, he could have sworn he saw movement near the edge of the woods. Daniel froze beside the living room window while rainwater streamed down the glass in crooked lines. The woods behind his property stretched nearly half a mile toward Blackwater Forest, and at night the trees looked endless. Another flash of lightning illuminated the yard for a split second. This time Daniel saw nothing moving, just wet grass bending under heavy wind. Rocky, however, remained completely focused on the darkness outside. The German shepherd stood rigid near the door, low growls vibrating through his chest. Daniel swallowed hard. "You saw something out there, did you not?" Rocky suddenly barked once and rushed toward the front door. His claws scraped wildly across the hardwood floor as he pawed at the handle. Daniel grabbed the dog's collar before he could slam against the door again. "No, absolutely not. It is storming out there." But Rocky refused to calm down. The dog kept staring toward the forest like he could hear something far beyond human range. Daniel's phone buzzed loudly in his hand, making him jump. Dozens of notifications flooded the screen. His post had exploded online faster than he expected. Hundreds of comments turned into thousands within minutes. Some users were now reposting the image across social media, circling the same hidden shape Daniel had pointed out earlier. Others accused him of spreading false hope during an active missing child case. Daniel opened a live comment feed and felt his stomach tighten. One person wrote, "That definitely looks like a child." Another responded, "People see faces and shapes in everything. It is probably branches." Then another comment appeared near the top. "Why is nobody talking about the dog's reaction?" Daniel looked down at Rocky. The German shepherd had stopped barking, but his ears remained upright and tense. He looked restless, pacing between the window and the television over and over again. The local news station suddenly interrupted regular programming for another update about Emily Carter. The anchor explained that weather conditions had forced volunteer teams to temporarily pause the nighttime search near Blackwater Lake because visibility had become too dangerous. As the anchor spoke, the same photograph appeared again on the screen. Rocky instantly reacted. The dog sprinted toward the television and barked so aggressively that Daniel nearly dropped his phone again. Okay, I get it, Daniel said nervously. He replayed the clip once more. This time he noticed something else. The hidden shape behind the log was not the only strange detail in the picture. Near the far left side of the image, partially hidden behind thick trees, stood what looked like a small hunting cabin. Daniel did not remember hearing about any cabin near that section of forest. He zoomed in farther until the image became blurry. The structure looked old and abandoned, almost swallowed by the woods around it. Rocky whined loudly the moment Daniel zoomed toward the cabin. Then the dog turned toward the front door again. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. You want to go there? Rocky barked immediately. Daniel ran one hand across his face, exhausted and confused. Every instinct told him this was a terrible idea. The storm outside was getting worse. Roads near the lake flooded easily during heavy rain, and the forest became dangerous after dark. But another part of him could not ignore what was happening. Rocky had reacted before Daniel noticed the hidden hand. Rocky reacted again when Daniel found the cabin. It felt less like coincidence with every passing minute. Suddenly another alert appeared on Daniel's phone. The local sheriff's department had officially responded to his viral post. The message read, "Authorities are reviewing the image currently circulating online. Citizens are asked not to interfere with active search operations." Daniel stared at the statement while thunder shook the house again. Then his eyes drifted toward Rocky. The German Shepherd stood motionless beside the door, staring directly at him as if waiting for a decision. Daniel looked from the phone in his hand to the German Shepherd standing beside the front door. Rocky did not move. The dog simply stared at him with intense focus, almost as if he already knew exactly where they needed to go. Another loud crack of thunder shook the house. Rain continued pouring outside so heavily that Daniel could barely see the trees anymore. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an incoming call from an unknown number. Daniel answered cautiously. "Hello. This is Officer Miller with the Blackwater County Sheriff's Department." The man's voice sounded calm but serious. "Are you the one who posted the photo analysis online?" Daniel glanced nervously at Rocky. "Yes, sir. But I was not trying to cause trouble. My dog reacted to the image and I noticed something strange in the background." There was a brief pause on the line. "We are aware of the post. Some people in the department think the image may simply be distorted by rain and poor lighting." Daniel looked toward the television where the frozen image still filled the screen. "Maybe, but my dog will not stop reacting to it." Officer Miller sighed quietly. "Sir, emotions are running high right now. We are asking citizens not to enter the forest tonight. The storm is making conditions extremely dangerous." Before Daniel could respond, Rocky suddenly barked loudly and scratched against the front door again. Officer Miller heard it through the phone. "Is that the dog?" "Yes," Daniel answered. "He has been acting like this for almost an hour." Rocky let out another sharp bark, then lowered his body close to the floor as if preparing to sprint. Daniel tightened his grip on the phone. "Officer, I know this sounds crazy, but I think he wants to go to the area in the picture." Another silence followed. Then Officer Miller finally spoke. "Stay where you are. We will send someone tomorrow morning if necessary. Do not go into those woods tonight." The call ended. Daniel stared at the screen for several seconds before lowering the phone slowly. Rocky continued pacing near the door with growing agitation. The dog looked restless in a way Daniel had never seen before. It was not fear. It felt more like urgency, as though every second mattered. Daniel walked back to the television and zoomed in on the old cabin again. The structure sat deep behind the search team in the photo, partially hidden by thick pine trees. He noticed something else now. One of the cabin windows looked slightly open. Rainwater trickled down Daniel's neck despite being indoors. He could not explain why, but a terrible feeling settled into his chest. Rocky moved beside him and stared at the same image. Then the German Shepherd let out a soft whine unlike anything Daniel had heard before. It sounded almost desperate. "You really think she is there, do you not?" Daniel whispered. Rocky immediately turned toward the door again. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. He knew how insane this looked. Half the internet already thought he was exploiting a missing child case for attention. Even the sheriff's department clearly doubted him. But deep down, he trusted Rocky more than he trusted strangers online. The dog had never behaved this way without reason. Daniel finally grabbed his flashlight from the kitchen drawer and reached for his heavy rain jacket hanging near the door. The moment Rocky saw the jacket, the German Shepherd sprang upright instantly. His tail stiffened and his ears locked forward. "This does not mean we are going into the forest," Daniel muttered nervously while putting on his boots. "We are just driving near the lake. That is all." Rocky barked once sharply, almost like he understood every word. Outside, the storm continued roaring across Blackwater County as Daniel opened the front door. Cold rain and bitter wind slammed into the house immediately. Rocky bolted forward into the darkness without hesitation. Rain poured across the windshield as Daniel drove down the narrow road leading toward Blackwater Lake. His headlights barely cut through the storm. Branches swayed violently above the truck, and water splashed across the pavement with every turn. Rocky sat, upright in the passenger seat, completely alert. The German Shepherd stared straight ahead without blinking, ears raised high every time the truck passed another dark section of forest. Daniel tightened both hands on the steering wheel. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. His phone continued vibrating nonstop from social media notifications, but he ignored them now. Something about tonight no longer felt connected to internet arguments or viral posts. Felt real, deeply real. As they neared the lake entrance, Daniel noticed flashing emergency lights in the distance. Several sheriff vehicles remained parked near the main trailhead, though most search activity appeared shut down because of the storm. Daniel slowed the truck and pulled onto the muddy shoulder. Before he could even shift into park, Rocky suddenly barked loudly and jumped against the passenger door. "Easy!" Daniel grabbed the leash quickly, but Rocky continued straining forward with intense urgency. The dog was focused on a narrow dirt service road partially hidden beside the trees. Daniel had not even noticed the path at first. It was almost invisible beneath overgrown brush and heavy rain. Rocky barked again, louder this time. Then he pulled so hard that Daniel nearly lost his grip on the leash. Okay, Daniel said nervously. "We will check it out." The moment they stepped outside, freezing rain soaked through Daniel's jacket instantly. Wind roared across the lake, carrying the smell of wet pine and mud through the darkness. Rocky wasted no time. The German Shepherd pulled Daniel down the hidden service road at a pace that felt almost frantic. Daniel struggled to keep up while shining his flashlight through the trees. "Rocky, slow down." But the dog refused. Every few seconds Rocky lowered his nose toward the ground, sniffed intensely, then surged forward again. Nearly 10 minutes later, Daniel stopped suddenly when his flashlight beam caught something hanging from a low tree branch. A small pink raincoat. Daniel's stomach dropped instantly. The coat swayed gently in the wind, soaked from hours of rain. Tiny cartoon rabbits decorated the front pockets. Rocky whined softly and stepped closer to it. Daniel carefully removed the coat from the branch with trembling hands. It was child-sized, very small. He immediately reached for his phone and dialed the sheriff's department. "Blackwater County Dispatch," a tired voice answered. "This is Daniel Brooks," he said quickly. "I think my dog just found something connected to Emily Carter." There was a pause. "Sir, where are you?" Daniel looked around at the dark forest surrounding them. "I am near some old service trail west of the lake. There is a child's raincoat here." The dispatcher's tone changed immediately. "Stay where you are. Deputies are on the way." Daniel hung up and looked toward Rocky, expecting the dog to settle down now that they had found evidence. Instead, Rocky became even more agitated. The German Shepherd began pulling harder down the trail, whining loudly while glancing back at Daniel repeatedly. "What is it?" Daniel whispered. Rocky barked sharply and tugged again. Daniel followed him deeper into the woods. The farther they walked, the quieter everything became. Even the wind sounded distant beneath the thick trees. Then Daniel saw it. Hidden through the darkness about 50 yards ahead stood the same cabin from the photograph. His heartbeat nearly stopped. The old structure leaned slightly to one side, surrounded by overgrown brush and broken fencing. One upstairs window hung partially open, moving slowly back and forth in the storm. Rocky growled low in his throat and moved toward the cabin carefully. Then suddenly the dog froze completely. His ears lifted high. Daniel stopped breathing. Somewhere inside the cabin, faint and almost impossible to hear beneath the storm, came the sound of a child coughing. Daniel felt every muscle in his body lock the moment he heard the sound from inside the cabin. It was faint, weak, and buried beneath the storm outside, but there was no mistake now. A child was inside. Rocky immediately surged forward with a deep bark, pulling hard against the leash. "Easy," Daniel whispered sharply, terrified of making too much noise. The cabin looked abandoned from the outside. Rotten wood covered the walls, and parts of the roof sagged beneath. Years of storm damage. Tall weeds nearly swallowed the front steps. But one dim yellow light flickered somewhere inside. Daniel's pulse pounded violently in his chest. He reached for his phone and dialed emergency dispatch again with shaking fingers. "I found the cabin," he whispered urgently. "I think the girl is inside." The dispatcher immediately responded. "Deputies are already heading toward your location. Stay outside and do not enter the structure." But before Daniel could answer, Rocky suddenly barked and lunged forward again. This time the dog broke free from Daniel's grip completely. "Rocky!" The German Shepherd raced up the steps and pushed against the loose front door so hard that it swung partially open. Cold wind rushed from inside the cabin carrying the smell of dust, rainwater, and mildew. Daniel hesitated only a second before following him. The inside of the cabin was dark except for a weak lantern glowing on a nearby table. Broken furniture covered the floor, and water dripped steadily through cracks in the ceiling. Rocky moved carefully through the room, nose low to the ground, ears constantly shifting. Then the dog suddenly turned toward a narrow hallway at the back of the cabin. Another faint cough echoed through the silence. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. "Emily?" he called softly. No answer came back. Rocky barked once and sprinted down the hallway. Daniel followed close behind until the dog stopped near an old wooden trapdoor partially hidden beneath a torn rug. Rocky immediately scratched at it with frantic urgency. Daniel dropped to his knees and pulled the rug away completely. The trapdoor looked old and swollen from years of moisture. He grabbed the rusted handle and pulled hard. At first it would not move. Then finally it creaked open several inches. A blast of freezing air rose from below. Daniel aimed his flashlight downward into darkness. "Emily?" he called again. For several terrifying seconds there was only silence. Then a weak little voice finally answered from somewhere below. "Help!" Daniel nearly collapsed from relief. "Oh my God!" Rocky immediately began whining and wagging his tail wildly. Daniel carefully climbed down the narrow stairs into a small underground storage room beneath the cabin. The flashlight beam swept across old shelves and dusty boxes before finally landing on a little girl curled beneath a blanket in the corner. Emily Carter looked pale and exhausted, but she was alive. The moment Rocky saw her, the German Shepherd rushed forward gently and lay down beside her. Emily weakly wrapped her arms around the dog's neck as tears filled Daniel's eyes instantly. "You are okay," he said shakily. "Help is coming. You are okay." Emily buried her face against Rocky's fur while the dog stayed perfectly still beside her, almost protective. Then something hit Daniel suddenly. He looked down at Rocky in complete disbelief. The dog had known. From the very beginning, Rocky had known exactly what he was seeing in that photograph. Daniel remembered what the shelter told him years ago about Rocky's former life in K-9 rescue training. Search patterns, human scent recognition, distress detection, the hidden hand in the picture, the cabin window, the trail through the woods. None of it had been random. Rocky had connected everything before any human did. Sirens finally echoed faintly through the storm outside as emergency crews approached the area. Emily looked weakly toward Daniel and whispered softly, "The dog found me." Daniel stared at Rocky with tears running down his face while the German shepherd rested his head gently across the little girl's lap. The sound of sirens grew louder outside the cabin as red and blue emergency lights flashed through the rain-soaked trees. Daniel remained kneeling beside Emily while Rocky stayed pressed protectively against her side. The little girl's small fingers clung tightly to the German shepherd's fur, as if letting go might make everything disappear. "You are safe now," Daniel whispered gently. Emily looked exhausted, but her breathing had already become calmer with Rocky beside her. Heavy footsteps echoed above them as deputies and rescue workers rushed into the cabin. "Sheriff's Department," a voice shouted. Seconds later, Officer Miller appeared at the top of the basement stairs with a flashlight in one hand. The moment he saw Emily alive below his entire expression changed. "Oh my God," he breathed. Rescue workers quickly descended the stairs carrying blankets and medical equipment. Emily's eyes slowly filled with tears when she realized people had finally found her. One of the paramedics wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders, while another checked her condition carefully. Through all of it, Rocky refused to move away from her side. The dog watched every stranger closely but remained calm, almost as if he understood the danger had finally passed. Officer Miller stepped down into the basement and looked directly at Daniel with disbelief written across his face. "You actually found her," he said quietly. Daniel shook his head slowly and looked down at Rocky. "No," he answered. "He did." The officer stared at the German shepherd for several seconds before crouching beside him. Rocky remained still while Emily gently rested her hand against the dog's neck. "This dog led you here?" Officer Miller asked. Daniel nodded. From the moment he saw that photograph on television, he knew something was wrong. He reacted to the hidden hand before anyone online noticed it. Then he recognized the cabin in the background. Officer Miller looked stunned. "How is that even possible?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Rocky used to train for search and rescue work before I adopted him." The officer slowly looked back at the dog with completely different eyes now. Upstairs, more deputies filled the cabin while paramedics prepared to bring Emily outside safely. News of the rescue had already spread through emergency radio channels across the county. One deputy standing near the stairs quietly said, "The whole department thought the internet photo theory was nonsense." Another deputy shook his head in disbelief. "That dog saw something every one of us missed." Emily suddenly looked up weakly at Daniel. "He stayed with me," she whispered softly. Daniel leaned closer. "Rocky did." Emily nodded slowly. "I heard him barking outside before you came in. I knew somebody found me." Tears filled Daniel's eyes again. Rocky gently rested his head across Emily's lap while the little girl stroked his wet fur with trembling fingers. Even the paramedics standing nearby looked emotional watching the scene unfold. Officer Miller cleared his throat quietly and stood back up. "Daniel," he said, his voice noticeably softer than before, "I owe you an apology. I thought your post online was just another internet rumor getting out of control." Daniel glanced toward Rocky again. "Honestly, I almost thought the same thing myself." The storm outside slowly began weakening as rescue workers carefully carried Emily upstairs wrapped safely in blankets. Rocky followed closely beside the stretcher the entire way. The moment Emily's parents arrived outside the cabin, emotional cries filled the cold night air. Her mother rushed forward in tears the instant she saw her daughter alive. But before Emily was placed into the ambulance, she reached one small hand outward toward Rocky. The German shepherd stepped forward immediately. Emily hugged him tightly around the neck, while cameras from local news crews captured the moment beneath flashing emergency lights. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Even the deputies stood silently in the rain watching the exhausted rescue dog comfort the little girl he had somehow found before anyone else could. By sunrise, the story had spread far beyond Blackwater County. News stations across the country replayed the rescue footage over and over again. Every channel showed the same emotional moment beneath the flashing emergency lights outside the cabin. Emily Carter wrapped in blankets, tears streaming down her mother's face. and Rocky standing quietly beside the little girl as if protecting her one final time. Daniel barely slept that night. He sat inside the hospital waiting area with a paper cup of cold coffee in his hands, while reporters crowded outside the building hoping for interviews. Rocky rested beside his chair, exhausted after hours in the storm, but strangers passing through the hallway kept stopping to stare at the German Shepherd with amazement. Some smiled. Others looked emotional. One nurse quietly knelt beside Rocky and whispered, "Good boy," before walking away wiping tears from her eyes. Daniel still struggled to process everything that had happened. Just 24 hours earlier, people online accused him of spreading conspiracy theories. Now the same photograph had become one of the most shared images in the country. Social media exploded with side-by-side comparisons showing the hidden hand in the background and Rocky's intense reaction to the television screen. Millions of people reposted the story with captions calling Rocky a hero. One headline read, "Rescue dog notices what entire internet missed." Another simply called him, "The shepherd who saved Emily." Officer Miller entered the waiting room carrying his phone in disbelief. "You need to see this," he said. Daniel looked down at the screen. The sheriff department's official post thanking Rocky had already reached several million views overnight. Thousands of comments poured in every minute from people around the world. "That dog never gave up on her. Animals see things humans miss. This made me cry before work." Daniel looked toward Rocky lying peacefully beside his chair. The German Shepherd barely reacted to the attention. If anything, he looked more interested in the hospital hallway leading toward Emily's room. "You know," Officer Miller said quietly, "search teams walked within 100 yards of that cabin yesterday afternoon." Daniel slowly shook his head. "And Rocky still noticed her from one blurry picture on television." The officer nodded with visible emotion. "Honestly, I do not think anybody in this department will ever forget this." A few hours later, Emily's parents invited Daniel and Rocky into her hospital room. The little girl looked much stronger now, sitting upright in bed holding a stuffed rabbit someone had brought her overnight. But the moment Rocky entered the room, Emily's face lit up instantly. "Rocky," she said softly. The German Shepherd immediately walked to her bedside and gently rested his head on the mattress beside her hand. Emily hugged him tightly around the neck while her parents fought back tears watching the moment. "She keeps asking about him," Emily's mother admitted quietly. Emily looked at Daniel seriously. "He stayed with me when I was scared." Daniel swallowed hard. "I think he wanted you to know somebody was coming." Emily smiled faintly and stroked Rocky's ears. "I knew he would find me." Outside the hospital, television crews continued gathering while the internet became obsessed with one question. How did Rocky know? Experts appeared on news panels discussing canine scent memory, search and rescue instincts, and emotional intelligence in dogs. But Daniel believed the answer was simpler than any scientific explanation. Rocky never stopped listening when everybody else stopped looking. Later that evening, one final image from the rescue went viral across every major platform online. It showed Emily sitting safely in her hospital bed with Rocky lying beside her, both of them finally asleep after the longest night of their lives. Millions of people shared the photograph for one reason. In a world filled with fear and noise, it reminded them that sometimes the purest heroes never speak at all. 3 months later, life in Blackwater County finally felt calm again. The storm that once terrified the entire town had become only a memory, and the old cabin near the forest had long since been torn down. But people still talked about Rocky everywhere Daniel went. Grocery stores displayed newspaper clippings near checkout counters. Local coffee shops sold mugs with the words, "Blackwater Hero Dog," printed across the front. Even tourists occasionally drove through town hoping to catch a glimpse of the German Shepherd who somehow noticed what nobody else could see. Yet Rocky himself seemed completely unchanged by the attention. Every morning he still waited beside the kitchen window for Daniel to finish making coffee. Every evening he still carried the same old tennis ball through the backyard like nothing extraordinary had ever happened. But there was one thing that had changed. Emily Carter visited almost every weekend now. On warm Saturday afternoons, Daniel would often find the little girl sitting cross-legged on the living room floor beside Rocky, reading books out loud while the German Shepherd rested his head quietly against her shoulder. The bond between them had become something impossible to explain. Emily's nightmares slowly disappeared after the rescue, according to her parents. Whenever fear returned, she asked to see Rocky, and somehow, simply sitting beside the dog always seemed to calm her again. One quiet evening in late summer, Daniel drove Emily and her parents to a small ceremony organized by the sheriff's department near Blackwater Lake. The same lake that once terrified the entire community now looked peaceful beneath the golden sunset. Folding chairs lined the grass near the water, while reporters and local families gathered together holding candles and cameras. Officer Miller stepped up to the microphone first. He looked emotional even before speaking. A few months ago, he began quietly, "This town experienced one of the darkest nights in its history, but we were also reminded of something important. Sometimes help arrives from places we least expect." He paused and looked directly toward Rocky sitting beside Daniel. This dog never gave up when everybody else was running out of answers. Applause spread across the crowd immediately. Emily smiled and wrapped both arms around Rocky's neck, while cameras flashed all around them. Officer Miller then walked forward holding a small silver badge attached to a blue ribbon. The badge read, "Honorary Search and Rescue Hero." The crowd erupted into cheers as the ribbon was placed gently around Rocky's neck. Daniel looked down at the dog and laughed softly through tears. Rocky simply wagged his tail once before looking back toward Emily again. Later that night, after the ceremony ended and the crowds disappeared, Daniel sat quietly on a bench near the lake while the last light faded across the water. Emily stood nearby throwing Rocky's tennis ball through the grass while the German Shepherd happily chased after it again and again. For the first time in months, everything felt peaceful.